The first talk of the new semester, the fall semester at USF. My name is D.A. Powell. I teach poetry in the MFA program. I want to thank Kimberly Garrett, our program assistant, and Dave Madden, our program director, for making all of this possible. And a thank you to our guests, Judy Graham and Jewelle Gomez. I was thinking in putting this event together about the idea of pioneering and what it means to be groundbreaking as a writer, as an artist, not just to invent new things, but to open up new spaces and new voices and new ideas. And I recently discovered that the people who live in the houses near the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam noticed a remarkable thing, that the noise from the airport would be drastically reduced That's live TV for you. The noise from the airport would be drastically reduced when the farmers took their plows out and broke the ground into furrows. The hard surface of the land made one kind of sound, and the broken furrows of the land resonated in different ways. So when I think about writers who are breaking new ground, who are pioneering for future generations, certainly Jewelle Gomez and Judy Graham come immediately to mind. And it really means a lot to me to think of the way that they have changed the conversation, they have changed the noise, they have changed the sound in the world. To introduce Jewelle Gomez, Weston McNorman, one of our graduate students, and to introduce Judy Graham, Tyler Hall, another one of our graduate students.
Who goes first? Hello, everybody. So we are blessed tonight with the presence of Jewelle Gomez. She is a legend. She is a treasure of this city as an author, an LGBT activist, an anti-racist, a feminist, and, pardon my pun, a gem of San Francisco. A tireless, stalwart defender and advocate for those who would be silenced by systemic oppression. She has weaponized her voice against the brutality of inequality. Her voice cannot be marginalized, but rather, forgive this pun, takes front and center in the pages of history, not to mention in hundreds of publications, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, plays, essays, libretti, you name it, and books, not the least of which, the Gilda Stories, is it won 2 Lambda Book Awards. Jewelle is also the recipient of a lot of other cool things, National Endowments for the Arts grant. There's quite a few fellowships. There's one for like this obscure school called Columbia, I read about, and then a few from the California Arts Council and San Francisco Arts Commission, and I think she's gained a few fans in that process, I think, judging by attendance here. But she's seen it all. It's really hard to pick accomplishments, like achievements here in introducing her. She was a founding member and the first treasurer of what is now known as GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. And she is a litigant in the initial case in California that legalized gay marriage for the first time. This is a long story, but yeah, the first one. She was at the Stonewall riots, I've read. That's a big deal. Wow. And also she was at the forefront of the San Francisco Pride movement of the 80s. Or should I say she remains at the forefront of the San Francisco Pride movement. And we are very proud to host her at USF. And thank you for coming, Jewelle. We look forward to this, pretty excited. Please give her a hand as much as that is possible in this environment.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Weston. And Tyler?
Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Hall. It's my final semester here in the MFA program. And I have the honor tonight of introducing Judy Graham. The common woman is as common as the best of bread and will rise and will become strong. I swear it to you. I swear it to you on my own head. I am the dike and the matter, the other. I am the wall with the womanly swagger. I am the dragon, the dangerous dagger. I am the bull dyke, the bull dagger. These are the powerful words of our next speaker, Judy Graham. As an artist, she has never been hesitant to speak truth to power and give voice to the marginalized and representation to the people mainstream heteronormative society so often casts as the other, the outcast, the pariah. Born in Chicago and raised in New Mexico, she has been quoted as saying she knew she wanted to be a poet as early as the age of 9. But I was inspired to find out that it wasn't until the age of 25, after recovering from a coma, that she was able to fully commit herself to the craft, saying, I realized that if I was going to do what I had set out to do in my life, I would have to go all the way with it and take every single risk you could take. I would not do anything I didn't want to do that would keep me from my art. I found this to be incredibly inspiring as someone who later in life came back to go back to school and pursue poetry myself. Embarking on an acclaimed career from there, I'm sure many of us are very familiar with her work, but she was also an activist and a pioneer, a member of the Gay Women's Liberation Group, the first lesbian feminist collective on the West Coast. In this do-it-yourself publishing age where so many of us are trying to get our work out online and in small local presses, we should recognize Judy as a forerunner of the type of hustle and determination it takes to truly share your craft with people, as she produced books, chapbooks, graphics, periodicals, and more with the foundation of the Women's Press Collective, which empowered and published lesbians disenfranchised by race and class, as well as founding the bookstore Woman's Place. And all of this is just in addition to her remarkable work, which we've all been reading. I believe it begins with the psychoanalysis of Edward the Dyke. She went on to write her widely regarded as her masterpiece, A Woman is Talking to Death, which we've all recently read in 1974, The Common Woman in 78. All of these brought attention to the women's rights movement and gay liberation. In today's frightening return to the bigotry and hate-fueled politics, I think all of us could take inspiration and lessons from her ability to combine the personal and the political and combat hate and heteronormative patriarchy pushing against us as it's on the rise again, as we can see with people like Mike Pence speaking tonight, who fervently and fanatically opposes gay progress wherever he finds it. She also went on to form the metaformic theory in her book, Blood, Bread, and Roses, How Menstruation Created the World, which focuses on menstrual rituals as the origins of human civilization. She has gone on to win the prestigious Lambda Literary Award for Love Belongs to Those Who Do the Feeling. I am beyond honored to present tonight's speaker, winner of the National Endowment of the Arts Award, American Book Review Award, an American Book Award, American Library Award, Founding Foremothers of Women's Spirituality Award, the Bill Whitehead Award for Lifetime Achievement. Please welcome the professor at the California Institute for Integral Studies, the amazing Judy Graham.
Thank you, Tyler. You covered a lot of territory.
Well, I think both of you have covered a lot of territory, and we're so honored to have you. I know you brought work to share, and we just want to hear, how was it? How did you begin to inhabit the Bay Area writing scene, and what was it like then? Do you remember?
Yes.
Can I just point out one thing that Tyler mentioned that I think is kind of maybe an interest to people in the class is the women's press movement, which Judy was a major part of here in the West Coast. And to talk, maybe Judy, you talk a little bit about that, what it meant to have that embracing you in your work.
Absolutely. That was so crucial. It was, I don't know, it took me a while to find my feet, to realize that I was just trying to be too good, you know, and from age 21 to 25, I just was trying to fit in and be supportive of a middle-class lover, wanted to be a teacher who was a teacher, and would have lost everything if she had, you know, if she had been living with an open lesbian poet. But after I recovered from a coma, whatever happened to me in that coma, it just turned me upside down, and I came out with courage. I just remarkable courage. It was like, this is do or die. Either this is do and die, as a matter of fact, because to be out was simply to risk everything. There was no career ahead of you. There wasn't even a decent job if you were out. An apartment, maybe, if your landlord was liberal. And no way to get published. You know, the first things I wrote, they could not get published at all. And I finally got mad enough to realize, what am I waiting for? You know, why am I waiting around? If I want to be in an anthology with famous poets, let's make an anthology with famous poets and put myself in it. And that just sort of clears the table and gets that out of the way. So that decision was the opening for starting a press, that and starting a movement. And the movement and the press went together. So the first mimeograph machine that I got, you all know what a mimeograph machine is, this very awkward thing with the
It was revolutionary at the time, right?
Revolving, what?
It was revolutionary at the time.
Yes, and it was the secretary's home base at the time, and the left, where you put flyers out, and it was the meme troupe. It was this radical left theater group. Let me come in at night and try to learn how to work this mimeograph machine, which I put ink all over myself finally, because I was just like frenzied and determined, and put stuff, you know, printed stuff and put it out myself. And because we had a movement of lesbian feminists, we weren't even called lesbian feminists. We were called Gay Women's Liberation. And this was like 69. And we needed things to read. And so, okay, good, I will write things and I will print things that other people have written, and we'll have something to read. So it was all motivated by being chased by nothingness, being chased by, you're going to die if you don't do this. You're just going to rot if you don't do this. So it was a life-saving. And it remains, I remain in that particular place, that I want to save my integrity and my life and my everything else by doing my work. I still feel that way. Does that answer your question, Jewelle? It was,
Yeah.
It was a remarkable moment of waking up and saying, no one is going to do this for you. Nobody. You do it yourself. It's like democracy. You do the democracy yourself. It doesn't come and knock on your door and say, come to the party. You are the party.
You gotta
start the party.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that story really captures how at the late 60s and 70s, how women were taking care of each other in this way, in part because nobody else would do it.
Right.
And so the women's press movement, would be like a magazine here, a publisher there, and it really was nationwide. It was totally amazing.
Yeah.
I got encouraged to publish myself just as kind of a fluke. I think similar to you, I'm thinking, gosh, who's ever going to publish me? I'm writing these cute little poems. And at that time, in early 70s, I was living in New York City in an apartment building. And I used to bump into this kind of middle-aged lady in the elevator all the time. Long story short, she asked me what I did. I said I was a poet. She said, have I read anything? When I said no, I couldn't find a publisher, she said, publish yourself. Don't wait for anybody. Well, it turned out the lady was Grace Paley.
Yeah.
And my roommate finally told me who this woman was. So I did. And at that time, I found a press that was run by women. They did all the typesetting and everything. And that's how I did my first book of poems. And the second book of poems. And as around us, I think these presses were growing and growing. There were publishing work by women and work by lesbians that no other publishers in the business wanted to see or hear.
Yes.
So we were fortunate in our timing. I think probably a lot of younger writers now do a lot of that on the internet. They create their own magazines and stuff like that, which is a whole different way of doing it. It certainly is cheaper.
Right. Or blogs. It took me ages to even know what a blog was. But then I realized, it's just great to be so spontaneous. I'm not that spontaneous. I make a list. I wonder if you work that way too. I make a list like a decade in advance of a to-do list, because I know then I'll do it. I follow directions if they've been written down.
Yeah.
Like at the grocery store, it's the same kind of thing. And I wonder if you work that way, or are you a person who can do blogging and do that, today my opinion is.
I do blog sometimes. I have a blog, but it's like you. I'm more like I make a list and then I decide what am I going to write about. I don't do most things off the top of my head, really. Every once in a while, but not that often. And with poems, I certainly would either think of a line or an image, save it in a folder.
Yeah.
And then go back to it maybe weeks, months, even years later. Most of my work comes out of one of those folders that are kind of sticking around on my computer.
Right.
Yeah, so, but there's always so many things to think about writing about, when I have taught and I give out prompts to students, I have to be careful I'm paying attention, because I'll start writing with them with the prompt and then give them too much time to work. Yeah.
Creativity are us. Yes. Once you open that valve, it just pours through, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. I know in my 20s, I couldn't find the valve. I was just really struggling because I knew I was going to be a writer. I'd known it for such a long time, but what was it for? I could not figure out what it was for until finally there was a movement that said, we need this work.
Yeah.
And then I was swept up on that wave, and carried along.
Yeah, I think if you don't envision who's going to read this, it's very hard to imagine why you would write it. I know I certainly felt that way, that why would anybody read about a colored lesbian? I mean, why? And of course it was other poets that made me open my eyes. Like I remember seeing you, Judy, for the first time. You'd come to New York. It must have been the 70s, late 70s, I can't remember. And You had on that big hat.
A hat?
You had on a big hat, and like a cowboy hat.
Okay.
And you were reading, and of course I had read your work, but then to see the poet reading the work was so moving to me. Hearing the words out loud made me think, oh yeah, I need to do this. Here's someone doing it, I need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing happened with Entezaki Shange when she wrote For Colored Girls. I heard that, I went to see the productions many times, and then I realized, oh yeah, I need to do this. I need to do this.
Yeah.
So it's like our voices are calling to each other in many ways, for women to recognize our voices and then realize their voices need to join in that chorus. I think is valuable.
Yes, that's absolutely right. It really did take communities, many of them. And when one community would collapse, look for another community and get involved in it, because that will pull your voice, because it pulls your meaningfulness along.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you confidence. And I find that's money to me. Money is. Give me a jar of confidence any day.
Right.
Because I'll take it and run with it, you know. The money, I'll just frivol it away, but you know, or just necessities, of course, but the confidence and to also to be stubborn enough that if the audience isn't there yet for your work, to say, I'm not going to be devastated by this, I'm going to go find an audience, or wait until people are ready for that. And I wonder if you find that as well, that sometimes you're early out of the gate with your work, and the audience is like, why is Jewelle doing that? Why are we talking about vampires? What vampires are?
Oh, absolutely. That's the nail on the head, I'll tell you.
What did people say when you first started writing the lesbian vampire stories?
Oh, the Gilded Stories was turned down by every major press publisher in New York City. And in fact, one editor wrote a letter back and said, well, you know, the main character is Black, she's an escaped slave, she's a lesbian, she's a vampire. That's too confusing.
Confusing.
It was too confusing. So I pushed on. I mean, even some of the feminists that I knew were concerned that it was going to feel like predatory vampire, and why would I write that with lesbians and all of that. So I felt a little despondent, but I didn't stop. I just kept going. So, you know, I felt fortunate that there were enough people. I mean, Firebrand Books, which was one of those lesbian feminist presses, Nancy Bariano just insisted this was going to be great. And actually, Audre Lorde read the manuscript and said, this is a novel. You really have to turn this into a novel.
Oh, great. Yes. Great.
So yeah. I felt really lucky, because I mean, if Audre Lorde tells you to do something, you better do it.
Yeah, you bet.
So maybe I'll read something if you think this is a good time.
Yeah. That would be great. That would be great.
Because I did adapt the Gilded Stories novel into a theater piece, a full-length theater piece for the Urban Bushwoman Company. And I'll read you a poem. It's in my most recent collection of poetry, but it was a monologue in the play. And it's called Gilda Sings About Desire. Love is a mystery, the clouded peaks of mountains. I had it for her, for others, but desire is even more. Savage, self-interest, elemental opening. To take, to reveal enough to take. Lay here beside me, feel me steal across you when you sleep. Suck your breath as they claim cats can do. Listen as I do this and be happy. I have finally come. It may be death, but it is also desire, a fuel, not a place. I push you back into the dirt, the soil of your ancestors, slipping inside you like a farmer reaching for new potatoes, moist, solid prizes, small scarlet reminders of survival. Hold on to the rock at your head, to the grass at your side, but not to me. I am motion, living within the moments that have survived the past. It's not difficult being Black, being Negro, being colored, being woman. It is difficult being and being and being, emptying out and refilling, reusable container, wanting. It is difficult to miss the dour certainty of the cotton rose and not offer blood as a substitute. Only this is assured. Desire lies in sweat, incoherent words never repeated before friends, and the loud song offered up. On your back, heels digging into the silken dirt, you've forgotten you ever had a mother or mailed a letter. You might have come from my past or your own. The future may belong to us both. When my mouth is open to let ideas out and you in, that is desire. Unstable, gaseous, explosive. You give me your breath. I would take your blood in mine, whether it meant life or not. Without our knowledge or consent, desire remains a foundry, toiling hot, productive for only itself, metal clanging, plunging, solid then liquid, alchemy, unchained melody. Desire is the only now I own.
Oh, that is so beautiful.
It's hard to write a vampire love poem.
Well, you certainly pulled it off, and you've got all of the power in there and different uses of blood as intimacy. Ooh, really nice.
Yes, I studied all that writing you did.
Say it again.
I studied all that writing you did about blood.
Yes, well, you talk about people not wanting to hear about vampires. They don't want to hear about menstruation either. In a certain way, it was easier for me to come out as a lesbian than it was for me to use the word menstruation in regard to what I was writing about, because there's such a taboo about it in our culture. It turns out it's unique to certain cultures to have a taboo like that about it, where it's just an unspeakable subject and you make it disappear. And all over so much of the rest of the world, it's celebrated as this marvelous thing that is creative and beautiful and dear and grounds to hold a festival. A festival, can you imagine? And your vampire stories made me think of, here's another, menstrual story that needs to get told. I love the Gilda stories. I think they're so amazing, and they're so vested in women-centered culture, which is one thing that I love about them. They inhabit queer space, in other words. It's don't they? Here it is in a bordello, here it is, in a place where they do your hair.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's so much more goes on in there than just doing your hair. It's a cultural center place. So to have a vampire show up and many other scenes that you set for these various lives, I was just totally delighted by that. Anyway, I wanted to come back. I'm looking for some kind of thing to respond to you with, and I'm just not turning to the page right. And I want to, and it just won't. It's like this desire piece that I wrote, and maybe it'll pop up and I'll be able to read it. But the thing that I was struck by, Doug, when you said that your students had been reading, writing from a house of women, which I wrote way past my early movement days, which were from 69 to, let's say, 1980. And it was about 5 years later that I wrote the piece with Sappho and all the other poets writing from a house of women. So for those of you who have read that, I can tell you I was writing from many houses of women, because what was substantial underneath our 70s movement that created institutions for women, I call them portals, ways to go from private life into public life, which women needed. So these presses fed the bookstores, which were portals and educational institutions. They were in the Bay Area. They were underwritten by the fact that women grouped together and lived in communal households. So I studied about 7 of these houses to see what we were up to, and wrote about it in my memoir, which is called A Simple Revolution. And just want to tell you just a little bit about the houses. The house that I lived in was on Terrace Street in Oakland. Almost, these houses were San Francisco and Oakland. They were in Berkeley. They were in other places too, but these are the ones I knew about. And each description of this house, different houses, I'm asking, you know, what is a house? And our house was a cauldron of creativity and intellectual engagement. Our house was full of art and poetry, and it was a gathering place for people who were editing things, and out of it we had we ran the press, and we ran the bookstore. And FYI, rents were so cheap at that time, which is how this could happen, because you go where you can be supported, right? So these households, we were just so fortunate. I paid $60, $60 a month rent. 60, unbelievable. You can hardly get lunch for that, you know what I mean? So in Berkeley,
we have the houses in New York where trans people would find community,
yeah,
and get support and strength from one another.
yes, and I stayed for overnight at least in Boston with a queen, a gay queen who was the center. He was the dorm mother of a whole collection of people that he fed every Sunday morning, and you know, all of that, and they crashed at his place all the time. Totally important to have a space, which can be a virtual space, but it's really important to have space and invite people into it. So here's another one, a place where women are safe and their labor is valued. In this house in Berkeley was owned by someone who didn't live there, but she said to this group of us, Gay Women's Liberation Dykes, well, we called ourselves Dykes, Dyke Warriors is how we thought of ourselves. She said to them, you can live in the upper part of the house if you use the downstairs as a battered women's shelter and a meeting place for women. This is how early this was, is that this was it for, you know, the Bay Area. There weren't any formalized shelters or anything like that. There wasn't any government funding, nothing like that. There was just some dykes who were doing this. These are the things we took on to do. Another one was in Bernal Heights. The women there were raising children collectively, but their house was full of beauty and kids' pictures on the wall. Another one was the Oakland Feminist Women's Health Center, where they turned it into a health center in the daytime, and at night they turned the Kotex boxes into couches, put towels all over them. Yes, they did, and that was where they lived. But you would never know that. You know, instead of potatoes being in the cupboard, it was actually syringes and things to do pelvic exams and so on.
That's
And Pat Parker, the poet that I was so bonded with for 15 or 20 years, she had a household also. And if I was going to write a sentence now about what that household was about, she used her house to form we were separatists, okay? We separated from everybody. It was separatism expedient. It was just for what we were doing. It wasn't that we were going to live like this the rest of our lives. And Parker did it again by creating an organization called Gente, which was for lesbians of color specifically. And they met in her house. There were a couple of other women who helped her form it. She didn't do it by herself, but that was a primary thing that she used her house for. So it was like a group within a group. So there could be, you know, a commonality of difference that could go on inside of a slightly bigger commonality, and then we all functioned in the greater world as well, including, for me, the gay world. I was always a part of that. So that's what we were as houses. I know this isn't reading to you. I'll read something.
Yay.
Don't let me take too much time.
There's no such thing. We're here for every part of it.
Okay. This is the last part of a poem that I wrote in '72, in the middle of this fomentation that was going on, where we were radicals and involved in every movement you can imagine. And we had our own movement in our press and our bookstores, and we wanted more. And this is something that comes up for young women so much. I see, again, there's the demand that you fit a certain physical stereotype in order to be considered a human being, practically, you know, but also certainly to be considered beautiful and worthy and attractive and all of that stuff. And we were dumping that out as fast as we could. This poem is called "The Woman Whose Head is on Fire." The woman with a noisy voice, the woman with too many fingers, the woman who never smiled once in her life, the woman with a bony body, the woman with moles all over her, the woman who sets broken bones, the woman who sleeps out on the street, the woman who plays the drums, the woman who is part grasshopper, the woman who herds cattle, the woman whose will is unbending, the woman who hates kittens, the woman who makes rain happen, the woman who refuses to menstruate, the woman who has fits on the floor, the woman who escaped from the jailhouse, the woman who is walking across the desert, the woman who buries the dead, the woman who taught herself writing, the woman who skins rabbits, the woman who believes her own word, the woman who chews bear skin, the woman who eats cocaine, the woman who thinks about everything, the woman who has the tattoo of a bird, the woman who puts things together, the woman who squats on her haunches, the woman whose children are all different colors, singing, "I am the will of the woman, the woman. My will is unbending." when she who moves the earth will turn over. When she who moves, the earth will turn over.
Mm.
So that.
It's incredible, Judy.
It's like a chant
It's
pulling us all into motion.
That was the idea, yeah.
Yeah.
And bringing in all of these differences and combining them into one space, one commonality. I think the word common really, the way that you use it to include everybody is so remarkable and so generous.
Well, this is something to go on a little more about where my work went. You know, I started in '73 after I wrote A Woman Is Talking to Death. I said, okay, I have just spilled my guts on the page with absolutely everything I know that could fit into a poem. And so now I am going to take on some prose. And so I did. I took on researching and writing about menstruation, and it culminated in Blood, Bread, and Roses, How Menstruation Created the World. But then from there, I continued my explorations, and I'm still continuing them, and understanding that we are all ritual beings, and how men and women and the genders all in between work together to make humanity who it is unfolds as I work with this material of hello Jewel, blood.
Yeah.
So yes, commonality is there. And then there's this other thing of the critique of lumping all women together as if all women are the same. And so common differences needs also to be on the table. And Audre Lorde was so great at defining who she was as a bundle of differences. And you know, she would say she was Black, she was lesbian, she was a mother, she was a poet, she was somebody who didn't talk till she was 4 years old, but she could speak in poetry, can imagine. So dear. But common differences, and she said they are to be celebrated. She said differences, we should celebrate our differences because, of course, because it gives us all of these options. It gives us all of these marvelous things to learn from each other and to learn about ourselves as we bump into each other in various ways. And it gives us ways to exert every single part of ourselves, including our courage to stand up to authorities that would to wipe us all out.
Amen.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I take away a lot from your work, Judy, and from Audre is women are always trying to find our commonalities with each other, to be open to the differences, to find our commonality. And that is the exact opposite, I think, of what the culture is always trying to do. I think the culture, the dominant patriarchal culture, is usually trying to get women to be separate, to be in competition with each other. We're portrayed as catty with each other, like we shouldn't trust each other. And the dominant culture is always trying to picture us in that way so that we don't see our commonalities. And whenever you see a lesbian character, usually the lesbian is totally out of context. It's just the one lesbian in a group of all those other people, as if lesbians don't have houses, don't have places where we make community together. And that's part of our strength. And the dominant culture is always trying to strip that away. And I find it very disturbing. I find it very, very disturbing that, you know, we have to keep reclaiming our narrative all the time, or people will pave it over and say, oh, we gave you the L word, so we're done with you now.
Right.
Or, oh, look, all the lesbians are in prison. Orange is a new black. We're done with you now.
Right, right.
No, prison isn't the only place that lesbians hang out together. And bless them for finding each other while they're inside.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But, you know, the whole world of who lesbians are, which is one of the reasons lesbian poetry is so significant and lesbian presses were so significant.
Right, and lesbian community is always and it's central to functioning of the culture in a certain way, and it's a secret. It's, you know, just a secret. The people who have gone back in history and talked about these little groups of people, and then they turn out to be lesbians, and they turn out to be supportive of, you know, Rachel Carson coming out with Silent Spring and awakening a whole country to, you know, this pressing, the most pressing crisis we can imagine, which is that we are falling off a cliff with the matrix of our survival. Or that Emily Dickinson had all these women around her and was writing all these love poems to women, and H.D. the same. And Gertrude Stein the same. They didn't operate in a vacuum at all.
Right. Right.
They had people around them.
In addition to community, a word that came up earlier in the conversation that I wanted to ask both of you about, Jewel, you in particular, the idea of ritual. Like, how does ritual inform your writing and your communal existence? And do you have rituals around your writing? Do you have rituals that you take with you into public spaces?
You know, I think, and Judy said this earlier, as human beings, we all have rituals. You know, it's a very unusual person who doesn't have something they look to confirm the possibilities of their living. And, you know, it's why many people are drawn to churches, because they need some organizing principle. That's not me. But I do keep, I have an altar in my office here, which it's a little too dark because, you know, it's my office for you to see it. I keep it on my bookcase, and it has iconic pieces of things that have had meaning to me over the years. I'm very invested in my ancestors and ancestor worship. Maybe because I was raised by my great-grandmother along with my grandmother.
Wow.
And so I try to keep their things around me so I can feel their influence. And I used to keep a lock of my great-grandmother's hair in a locket around my neck all of the time. I do have kind of ritualistic, whenever I work on something, I have to go through a series of things to do them. I mean, it's really not relevant what they are, but, you know, it's, you know how some people, they have to touch each light post as they go by, you can't help it. You have to do it. I'm kind of like that. There's certain things in my office and on my altar I have to touch before I start anything new, whether it's a play or a poem or the next volume, the sequel to the Gilda stories. I kind of have to go through these things and touch them. So yeah, I definitely have that ritual feeling that infuses everything that I do.
To me, the Gilda stories are an ancestral ritual, you know, because you go through her transformation over generations, that she starts out in one part of what could be conceived of as a whole family's life pattern, and then she's reborn again and reborn again. But also the ritual of the way that the vampire and the vampires in your story, they do a healing ritual with other people. They bite them, and then they do an exchange. They leave them with a gift, which is brilliant. It's just brilliant. Are there other vampire stories that are like this? I love that piece of it. It was just like completely transforms the whole notion, and it's evocative of what therapists do when they really poke you, you know, and you a little, and then you get over yourself a little bit or become aware of something. It's provocative of I used to work in medicine in my 20s when you have to put a big needle in somebody, you know, and you dot the blood with a little piece of cotton, and it's to heal them in some way, and there you are having them do this for someone who isn't even aware that it's happening to them, but they're changed after they encounter the vampire.
I have to credit Nancy Veriano, who founded Firebrand Books.
Yes.
Look, I don't think you really want to write a book in which the main character is a serial killer. I said, you're absolutely right, I don't.
Yeah.
And I had been trying to figure out what to do, and I thought about my great-grandmother, who was Native American, and she often said, you can't, I mean, this is a common theory, I mean, many cultures, but you can't take something without giving something.
Yeah.
And she always said that to me. And so I started thinking about that. Well, how could the vampires do that and be in opposition to the negative vampires who are all about death, the cult of death?
Right.
And so once Nancy said, yeah, you don't want to be writing about serial killers. My great-grandmother, again, a moment where my great-grandmother came back to me and said, you know, this is how you could really change this up. And that has really served me. And in fact, when I took a long time to write the Gilda stories. And when I was writing it, I donated blood as frequently. I can't remember now what, you know, this was back in the late 80s, early 90s. And you could give blood only a certain number of times because they didn't want to totally deplete you. So as my giving back, I donated blood to the Red Cross every period that I could. And so when I had the opening party, the launch party for the Gilda Stories, I had it at the Now office, actually. And the Red Cross gave me a big bowl of these little blood drops. They were plastic that they used to give out when you donated. And they'd seen me so much there. They gave me a big bowl of them to give out to people who bought the books.
Oh, that's charming.
Yeah,
it's charming. Yes, marvelous.
Listen, I'm going to open it up a little bit. I know audience members have questions. Our introducers each have a question. I'm going to start with Tyler Hall. Can we pull up Tyler? It's always nice when people can ask questions on camera.
Hey, hello again, Judy. So before coming back to school, I had a band for a long time in New York, and I was really inspired to see that you've also combined your poetry with not only song, but dance and performance. And it seems like today poetry and poets are really taking a shift towards kind of like multimedia and combining their written work with photography and things like that. I was just wondering how important funneling your creativity through those different mediums is to you, and where you see it going from here.
Oh, well, I'm always so thrilled with it. And it's my privilege. It's been musicians approach me and say, I want to do this with your music, or you know, I beg them, please do this. Or, you know, somebody just spontaneously choreographs something that's been recorded with music. The time that I tried to do it on my own, I actually had a little band. We were three of us. We called ourselves Friends and Lovers, which we were, and we called what we were doing sound poetry. This was in 1989, and you know, keyboards had just come out, and I'm trying to remember the terminology, and I'm not going to be able to, but that mixers, the fact that music could be taken apart in its various components, and before that hadn't been possible, that you could have a machine that would only do
you could isolate.
Yes,
you could
isolate it. It's MIDI is what I'm trying to, musical interface, digital interface. So anyway, we could then sample different things and put background music in what we were doing. So my frying pan became a sound that was worked into this whole tape that we did, and then we actually went to the Women's Music Festival and played we played our stuff. Chris, my partner Chris, had a bicycle wheel, and she would, you know, rotate it and do the spokes, and that was part of a story that she was telling, and so on. So we just called it sound poetry, and we could have done something with that, but one of us was a physician. She was also 8 months pregnant. You know, Chris had her own business, repairing cars at that time, and now she's a professor. And I had this list. I told you I make a list of what I'm doing, and my list just guides my life. So I wish I could do that. I hope I'm reborn as a musician, because I just envy them so much. You know, I love that you open your mouth and all this beauty comes out. It's amazing to me. It's amazing. But I just have been fortunate that other artists have glommed onto what I've been doing and tell me about it. And I'm thrilled when that happens. So thanks for that question. I actually have something on CD Baby that you can download, because Ann Carroll Mitchell and I made a record together. It's not a record anymore, but whatever, it's not a CD anymore. I don't know what it is. We made an album.
Is it available someplace, Judy?
Yes, on CD Baby.
Ooh.
You can download it. You can download pieces of it. It's my poetry, her music.
That's amazing.
Great.
Yeah.
Jewelle, do you have any downloadables?
Not musically speaking. I mean, I had the great fortune of working with urban bushwomen who commissioned me to adapt the Gilda stories, you know, all singing, all dancing vampires. And Toshi Reagan, who most of you will know is a fabulous musician, composer, singer, she did all of the music. So I would write, you know, the script and say, well, right here, we need to be able to see that the vampires are taking blood, but they're not killing. We need to see that difference. And she'd write a song. And the choreographer would create a dance. And I felt that was a 3-year process. It was one of the most intense processes I ever did. And then we traveled around, around the States for about a year to more than 13 cities at this point.
I saw
We
the
never-
show in Iowa City.
Yes, right. Iowa City was so intense. I thought, oh gosh, here we are with the Black lesbian vampires in Iowa City. Will come. Are there any Black people there? But it was really very successful, and I loved doing it. I personally have no musical talent whatsoever. So fortunately, Toshi could cover, she covered all the bases. And what I've done since, and we didn't record anything really from the songs, any of the songs. What I've been doing lately, though, is writing plays, and I use music from the period of the play, like the 30s and the 50s, which is where I've been pretty much writing my plays, and use contemporary music from then. I really do feel that, once hip hop broke through and really developed an interest in the spoken word in a different kind of way, poetry has traversed those boundaries. And I think that's really exciting and valuable.
Yeah.
Thank you. Weston, you have a question? Where's Weston? Tyler, that was a great question. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, Weston.
Hi. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So this might be like a really oddball question. There's a slight introduction, but my friend and I from high school, we had this teacher, and it was not related to anything we were studying, but he said that he was really obsessed with zombies. A literary monster that he said, like all literary monsters, represents like a fear that we all have, like on some kind of like archetypal level. And he said that the zombies represent a fear of demagoguery. So they're like these brainless creatures that go and eat other brains and like virally become more. And but like there's also like some kind of like capitalist.
They wear red hats too.
Yeah, they but often the survivors in a zombie environment, they find themselves at like stereotypical places like shopping malls. So that's, I guess, interesting. And then I took off, and I decided that like space aliens, like a la X-Files, were like really like since the 70s, the like little gray aliens like just have taken over, but they're always accused of like abductions and like experiments, and I feel like they represent a kind of a fear of like the unknown and like the rapid pace of technological advance and stuff. And they're really freaky to me for whatever reason. I was always scared of aliens. But anyhow, you've written a book or two or several stories about vampires, and I was always thinking that like vampires, like they're like, well, you'd be more of an expert here, but I wondered about Gilda. Like, she can live forever. At some point, she chooses not to. It is thought, but she can if she wants. But is she forever young though? And would you say that there's like a value in having like immortality if you're forever young or not? If that makes sense. That's a question.
Yeah, that's a whole lot of things to think about. One, I would say, I do believe that the culture creates things to mitigate their fear of the unknown and of dying. I think that's why the culture created vampires, religion, all these things that will help you forget that from dust you come, to dust you go, and that there's really nothing after that dust. So vampires have taken over the world. I don't really write vampires because I find they don't think about a lot of things. They are that, they're all kind of controlled in this way that you talked about. So I don't really write vampires. I mean, the zombies because of that. I'm more interested in what's going on behind the heads in the mind. And the traditional things about vampires, and I did study a lot before I started writing, and I threw some things out and kept some things. But one of the traditions about vampires is that at whatever age you were turned into a vampire, that's the age you remain for the rest of your existence. And I think it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot to be mined in that. Also, you can't really change anything about yourself once you're a vampire. Like, if my hair is this length and looks like this, it's gonna be this length and look like this for as long as I exist. So I think that's, you know, every positive thing, like living forever, has to have a negative thing, because that's the nature of nature. And I don't think changing into a vampire does exempt you from morality. That's one of the differences. I think my vampires are much more morally responsible than the traditional vampires. But they still have fun.
We have a question from Evan Evans. Where are you, Evan? Here comes Evan. Through the miracle of technology, we can see him anywhere. This is like having a seance.
Right. There's Evan. Unmute.
Yeah, I got it. Gals, hello.
Hey.
I am so grateful to be able to, I wish I could see you in person. I feel like I'm speaking to my godmothers of how I came out back in, the 1970s and 1980s in California, specifically the Bay Area and Los Angeles. So thank you so much for still fighting the good fight. It's really such an honor to be here and listen to you. I have a bunch of questions and I can't remember where I put them.
They're in the Q&A box.
Oh, let me open that again. Let's see. Oh, nope, no answered this.
I'm interested in both your observations of the evolution of lesbian culture and literature from the 1960s to the present, and where do we go from here?
Ah, thank you.
That's one of them.
One of three.
That you have two more. Do you want me to read them?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Okay, the second one is, I feel like LGBTQ cultural identity is not only under attack, but seriously fragmented.
Did we lose Judy?
We might have.
Judy, did you touch your button?
Well, while we're waiting for Judy.
There she is. Now, unmute.
Unmute.
Back again. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Shall I continue, or maybe that's what happened? No open questions. They're not going to give them to me. But that question was, and then you had a third question specifically for Jewelle, but I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, since I wrote that one last, I actually remember what that was, and it's mostly, and that question involves Jewelle. What prompted you to start exploring your Native history after spending so much time doing all the other great work?
Well, shall I jump in before we get to the bigger questions? I was raised by my great-grandmother, who was born on Indian land in Oskaloosa, Iowa. Her father was an Iowa Indian. She then later married a Wampanoag in New England, which is the older New England tribes.
Yes.
So she always told me that history. In fact, she wrote out a lineage for me from me going back to Massasoit, who was the chief who welcomed, unfortunately, the Pilgrims.
That was a bad day.
It was a mistake. It was a mistake. I like to think if he knew what was going to happen, he would not have answered the door.
Yeah.
But so she'd always told me about that, you know, when I was coming of age in the 60s and I lived in an African-American community. And so that was the thing I focused on, really. And I wrote a short collection of poems that's really about the evolution of that, called the Name Poems, which is on Amazon. But so then as my mother, who did not raise me, got older, she decided to do some of the research, and she passed on all the information she could to me. And so as I got older, when I moved to San Francisco, I brought my mother out to San Francisco and took her to Alcatraz. And it was really very moving for her.
Yeah.
We went to look at the Native American installation that's down on the lower floors, and she was very, very moved. She did a lot of research herself and then gave it all to me.
Wow.
She went to this island in the Caribbean where Wampanoag Indians had been taken to be slaves in the 1700s, and visited the remaining Wampanoags who still lived there.
Wow.
Who embraced her. And the woman who had taken her there gave her her Indian name and gave me my Indian name. And I decided that I really needed to write more and to think more and research more from that time forward. It has meant a lot to me to be able to embrace that kind of silent part of my personality. So if you look up name poems, you'll see the little story of their names and my name is there.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you.
I want to circle back around to Evan's second question, and this will probably be, did we lose something? Okay. This will be maybe the final thing to respond to, so that we can all go watch the debates on rerun and see what's going on. But the question is, Evan asks, I feel like LGBTQ cultural identity is not only under attack, but seriously fragmented.
Yeah.
How can we as writers try to strengthen and regroup our differences into a united force again?
Right. I'd like to address that. I'd like to preface it by saying that my experience with feminism, which I deliberately connected dykes up to feminism, others did as well, but I was one of the voices that said, let's do this. And feminism, which is a great movement in behalf of women, and it spread all around the world, was just the most contentious battleground. Just, you know, there was the differences were acted out in various ways. People locked each other out and called each other's names. And yes, there were even some death threats over everything. Money, could lesbians even be feminists? Sex, what about sadomasochism? Isn't that a total betrayal? You know, it's on and on and on. And then all of the different generic differences that have to do with race, class, different types of orientation, and so on. And I think we've lost Evan, but
Oh, Evan's still here.
oh, okay. But also the movement expanded in many ways and started to incorporate people of higher classes, of different classes, people with a lot more privilege, who engaged with money. So now there are gays for Trump, there are lesbians for Trump, there are, obviously lots and lots of Democratic LGBT people. There are LGBT people who will never vote, who think that of themselves as anarchists and they don't participate at all. And of course, all these things all around the world. So it's not really surprising that we would be this fragmented 50 years in to an active public movement. And it's distressing. But what writers have always done is to help create community. And community is singular, but it should never be singular. It's always communities, and they overlap. And some of them never meet each other, and some of them are hostile to each other through their whole existence, but lots of them overlap. And it's really, to me, it's our job to know different kinds of communities, to know where we stand, to be able to say where we stand, and to reach out to other people, both those who stand where we're standing and those who aren't standing where we're standing, and do our, damnedest to resolve whatever it is that's at issue. And if we can't do that, find what the commonality is. In this case, the commonality would be the Christian right wants you to all disappear. So, okay.
Two members of the
I don't want to disappear.
two members of the Supreme Court have said they want to overturn the gay
Marriage.
The marriage, yes.
Yeah.
But there are always gay people. Gay people congregate in various ways, and what it requires is to be clever. Here, can I tell a story? Do we have time for me to tell a story? In my high school, you couldn't say the word lesbian. No one even knew really anything about that. And the kids knew the word queer, they knew it was horrible and you mustn't do that. But in our textbook, we were studying a piece that Gertrude Stein wrote called Miss Fur and Miss Skeen, that uses the word gay about, 35 times or something.
They were gay every day.
In every way, we were gay in every way, every day. And we ended every day in a gay way, And if you decode it, which of course I couldn't do it at the time, but this was I was 17, it was in this high school literature course, and no one had any idea what it meant. And it was only later when I realized what Gertrude Stein was up to that I deciphered it. And it's an entire short story about a relationship that actually breaks up in the middle. It's quite simple to understand it once you get that that's what she's doing. And she slid that by, all the censors in Texas. They just simply didn't know. And the same thing happened with one of my poems, which is, ostensibly it's about fish and the sea and everything, but it's really about cunnilingus. And anybody who knows that is going to know that that's what it's about. And anybody who doesn't know anything about that subject, I'm sorry for them. They don't get it, So there just are all kinds of ways, and gay people have always been so clever with our language, with our signal systems, with our, ways of congregating in a variety of different contexts and so on, that I'm sorry to see that there's this religious rise, but it's not just us that's being impacted by it. It's like all kinds of people right now, especially people subject to illness, you know, because it's an entire philosophy that is it's medieval. It just is. It's just goes back centuries and centuries. I hope I'm not stepping on everybody's toes here, but really, that religion, what they're calling religious right, is the right to impose a religion on other people, and that's just simply wrong. And it's not going to last because it's so wrong, and things that are so wrong get challenged every generation, and you find your way to do that, and then you can have a meaningful, satisfying life. That's my short answer.
Jewel, you wanna add?
Yeah, I would just say quickly that you know, it's no longer just the 10 of us going to the club and signaling each other. You know, as more lesbians have come out, obviously, as Judy said, you know, we got your gay Republicans, we got your super wealthy gays, lesbians who wouldn't be caught dead in a plaid shirt. I mean, we've got all walks of life. And to me, I understand how that happens. The more we expand and the number of people who come out. So for me, what has been the organizing principle has been lesbian feminism. You know, if I can make community with people who have a philosophy, that progressive philosophy, then it's all good. Whatever happens, however it's changing, if we can have that core group of lesbian feminists who are looking towards social change, I feel okay. And we may not see each other on television. We may not all be voting for the same candidate, but we really do need to struggle together as lesbian feminists. And yes, it can be hard. Yes, people can be awful to each other, but that organizing principle of lesbian feminism is what gives me hope for what happens for us as a people going forward. And when people say, oh, well, you know, lesbians, they do this, they do that, they don't like Black people, they don't do this, they don't blah, blah, blah. And I just say, you know what? Feminism is the only philosophy out there which asks you to challenge the status quo, asks you to challenge the dominant culture. And maybe all feminists don't do it perfectly, but it's in the philosophy itself to deal with racism, sexism, transgenderism, transphobia. I mean, it's all part of being a feminist. So that's what gives me hope for the communities in the future.
All right.
Amen. I can't believe that we got to spend this amazing time together. Judy, Jewel, so much love for both of you. You know, it means so much to me what you've written, what you continue to put out into the world, and how you inspire me and others. And I just want to lift you up because you have lifted me tonight, and I know others as well.
Thank you. I feel good being here. You know, as I said earlier, being with other writers and thinkers really inspires me.
Yes,
and if anyone from your class has additional questions that they were too shy to ask, don't forget, you know, you can email us. We'll keep talking. We'll give you something to take back to them.
All right.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate you both enormously.
Well, I appreciate you, Doug. Thank you so much for doing this and for being such a loving spirit beam person as you are.
And such a lovely poet. I can't wait to pull your book down off the shelf.
Let's do something together when the world opens up again.
Okay.
Let's do a collaboration.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna let folks sign out and say good night. God bless us, everyone, and Goddess bless us. And may the Kamala Harrises of the world prevail.
Yes, indeed.
Yay.
Yay. All right. So
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. Good night,
night.
everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.